you? Okay. Well, I guess we're here to talk about the Rings of Power, more Tolkien. I hope you can see the map I have up. Can you see it, Carl?
Yep, I think.
All right.
Yeah, I think I have that actual book somewhere.
Yeah, I got it out of
Like the book that map comes from. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I guess Second Age, Middle Earth, and Valinor or Aman. Just wanted to get a sense of what we were talking about. Um, I guess I guess we've talked about it a little bit. I like Rings of Power a little more than you do. My problem with Rings of Power, as you know, is Numenor. I mean that's kind of almost an Achilles heel for the show. I think their portrayal of the Numenorians is just too ordinary. I don't understand how Numenor, the way it's portrayed, could ever believe that it can challenge the gods. I don't get it. It's just they don't seem that impressive. I mean, when Tolkien wrote about the Numenorians, they lived to about 300 years, I guess, 250 years, and they're all 6 feet tall, 6 feet. And Elendil, of course, is Elendil the Tall. He's almost 8 feet tall, and Isildur is 7. So I have a problem with that portrayal. Otherwise, the show to me, it's not a bad show. It's obviously an adaptation. I mean, Tolkien, left a lot of open space to kind of look into the backstories. There's a lot of backstory filling that you can do with Tolkien. So I don't have that much trouble with the backstories, because I've been reading Unfinished Tales, and in that, like Tuor, the story of Tuor, that gets filled up in his other writings, in his letters and stuff like that, a lot more than in the Silmarillion. So there's a lot more backstory filling Tuor, and there's a lot of disagreement. And one of the big ones is Galadriel and Celeborn. That seems to be all over the place. Where they were, how they participated in the struggles. That to me is, I mean, so you could actually kind of fill in the backstory for Galadriel pretty well. Even if you go, I mean, yes, the warrior princess thing bothers me a little bit, but it's not decisive for me. I guess you don't see it that way, right? Or am I wrong?
No, so the Numenor thing, I'm in complete agreement. Numenor is not done well. The scale is not done well. The splendor is not done well. Just even the number is going to send 500 army of 500. Like,
yeah.
Okay. Anyway, but the Galadriel thing, I do think the license for what they're filling in, and therefore also what they're leaving out, is kind of large. Like her husband, he's missing, MIA. That's pretty.
Yeah, I think he's missing. I'm pretty sure he's not dead. He's just missing, right?
Yeah. But that they don't mention that until much later. I think it's episode 7. And I think the purpose of that is how brand a potential romantic interest for Galadriel, because if she's single, the answer is yes. If she's taken, the answer is no. And how long are you going to take to tell us that she's taken?
Yeah, that was part of it.
So I actually had this. I had this thing with the show where actually I felt like I had peaked maybe episode 4, episode 5, and then like 6 and 7. I'm like, this is not great. And actually, I thought, to me, parts of episode 8 kind of redeemed it for me. So the Halbrand as Sauron.
Yeah.
I liked. So okay. It was some things I still don't understand, and it was less good than it was in my head. but there were moments where, this is good, this is kind of brilliant. He said, it's probably the best line in the whole show. When she's like, "Who are you?" He's like, "I've had many names," and said like, "I have been awake since before the breaking of the first silence."
Yeah.
Oh, that's a deeply haunting line, and
Yeah.
that's beautiful. It's poetic. It's also true.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, Sora. Yeah.
that's another thing. That's another thing that I think the Jackson films hit that this is missing. When you
Yeah.
read Tolkien, especially the Silmarillion and like all the past, I like the pre-third age readings. The prose is beautiful.
Yeah.
When I read the Silmarillion, I'm in wonder of every sentence. Even the Unfinished Tales, I had to pause from that. But I was reading Unfinished Tales too. I'm like, this is just beautiful. I think I was in the Huron chapters,
Yeah.
and a lot of the dialogue in the Lord of the Rings is beautiful, and because it has that almost Shakespearean quality
Yeah.
to it. It feels lofty. It feels important. I don't get that from the dialogue in this show.
Mhm.
That
Well,
there's
there are moments,
the
right? I
beauty
mean,
of the
I thought
language.
that moment. I agree with you that when he's telling Galadriel, because he's trying to tell her the truth, and she doesn't catch
Yeah,
it. You know, well, he might be telling her the truth because he knows by kind of introducing some elements of the truth in a whole lot of lying that he can manipulate her better.
hmm
I think, but there are instances where if you looked at it, yeah, he comes a girl, yeah, he said, and he's obviously they portrayed him as someone who's, a great craftsman, which is Sauron.
yeah.
So and
That's actually
go on.
that's something I actually didn't get, and I don't think was portrayed well. So something I've always wondered because it's not clear in the text what Sauron did to I guess give Celebrimbor the skill or the knowledge that when Celebrimbor on his own and crafted the rings because they were untouched by Sauron's hand, that they still had Sauron's effect.
Yeah.
I don't think the show actually did that at all.
Well, don't you think that the whole idea was, when he was telling Celebrimbor that they had to mix some of the different alloys together, so that that kind of, yeah, it wasn't mystical, but he's trying to hide that.
No, do you think Sauron has a trademark on alloys, and anyone that uses an alloy
Well, yeah, it wasn't
automatically
great writing.
like
I grant that it wasn't great writing, but
yeah.
they're adapting a classic, right? A fantasy classic. They're adapting it, so they may not be up to that level, and they're adapting a very difficult piece of work. It's much more difficult to adapt something like the Second Age or even the First Age, God knows, than to adapt
And they're
the
adapting
Lord of the
a
Rings.
vague prequel. Yeah,
Yeah,
the thing is also they're adapting a vague prequel.
yeah,
There are things that are only one line in
yeah,
the text that they have to make a whole scene out of.
right. And
Um,
they're trying to compress thousands of years
yeah,
because this is a big tale. The further you go out, Tolkien had that, I guess. The earlier it is, the more impressive it is. The more impressive
mhm.
people are, the more impressive wars are, the more impressive struggles are, the more impressive the elves are. And as you get later and later, that becomes smaller and smaller. So they're
Yep,
adapting the tale. They didn't adapt the first age, which would be my favorite, but
yeah.
it's difficult to adapt the second age. And my big problem was that Numenorian. The other stuff, the Gandalf stuff, I kind of got a sense that he was Gandalf, or at least not Gandalf, but he is the Maya that is within.
Yeah.
And by the way, there was that letter that Tolkien, I don't know if I sent it to you, but the letter that Tolkien wrote a fan where he said, yes, Olorin appeared many, many times during the first age, and why not the second age? Because he appeared, he dealt with men and elves in different forms. So Tolkien himself kind of admitted that, yeah, okay, the Maya, who is Gandalf, Olorin, appeared.
Yeah.
And so I don't have a
So
problem.
I was hoping more that he was going to be a blue wizard, but I think there were enough hints in the last episode
Oh yeah, he's definitely Gandalf.
that this is Gandalf.
Yeah,
And
who knows?
now,
Who knows?
so the question is, like, Gandalf, he kind of comes and goes
Yeah,
between Valinor and Middle Earth. I wonder how much Gandalf that we see in Lord of the Rings remembers that. Like, does he remember meeting Nori the Harfoot? Like, I
I
mean,
think
we won't ever get
I
these
think it's a
answers, but
yeah. I get a sense that it's a haze. Like
yeah,
there's this idea. Remember when I mean when Gandalf comes back as Gandalf the White, and they
yeah,
say Gandalf for the first time, and he says, "Oh yes, I
yeah,
remember. That's what they called me in this life." I
yeah,
mean, he had only disappeared shortly. Whatever they call him in this series, I don't think it'll be Gandalf. I think it will be another name, but he'll be
yeah,
the spirit that is within Gandalf, the Maya. Because as you
yeah,
incarnate,
no,
right? I mean,
yeah,
Tolkien has that. As you incarnate, you lose some of that divine power. Even Melkor, even Morgoth, kind of is not as powerful as he was in Valinor. Once he descends to Middle Earth, he loses some
yeah.
of his attributes, right?
So what do you think then is in the East for him?
I don't think he's going to get all the way east. I think he's going to ultimately, uh, you know, be somewhere. This is my sense. I mean, Tolkien said that when Gandalf is sent in the Third Age, he doesn't want to go
Hmm.
because he fears Sauron. He's afraid. Well,
Yeah,
he doesn't necessarily fear Sauron, but he's not confident that he can defeat Sauron or Sauron's plans. So I think there might be a
hmm,
confrontation at some point where Sauron bests him. It's something that Peter Jackson did, and he introduced that whole cloth where the Witch King, right? The Witch King
yeah,
defeats, seemingly defeats Gandalf before the Rohirrim get there. That moment, right? In the extended version,
he breaks his staff. Yeah,
breaks the staff. That's not in the books at all.
no,
Gandalf never faces the Witch King.
no,
But I think that there is enough in Tolkien where he says that Olorin doesn't want to go. He doesn't feel confident enough to take on Sauron. And this is why Saruman kind of takes the lead, although he's ultimately convinced to go, right? And he does
yeah,
go.
and he so also Gandalf is the last of them of the wizards to arrive, and
Mhm.
I think Círdan at the Grey Havens is like, oh, there's something special about you. Here, take my ring. And it's the ring of
Yeah,
fire.
right, right. He gives him that. He recognizes that Gandalf is special. But I don't have a
Oh,
problem with Gandalf appearing in the Second Age, and I don't think it's a violation of the canon or the lore that Tolkien set down, because Tolkien himself
no,
admitted it. I mean, when he's talking about Glorfindel, I think he says
yep,
that Olorin also lived in many guises during the first stage. He dealt with men and elves, so I don't have that
yeah.
issue. And I like I'm not against the portrayal of the hobbits. I think that's a good portrayal. I think the actors there are wonderful. I think that
I actually think
you don't agree with that.
the Hobbit portrayal is the best in the show.
Yeah, yeah, I
No, I
think
agree. I think the Hobbit portrayal is the best in the show.
yeah,
I think the dwarves are slightly goofy.
yeah,
The elves aren't majestic enough. Numenor isn't grand enough. Oh, and the downtrodden men, the dirty,
yeah,
sloppy, downtrodden men. Like, I think, oh, they're very good downtrodden men. But I think the hobbits are done the best of
yeah. I
as
think
like,
the
oh,
hobbits are likable. They're you can empathize with them. although they have this kind of almost this, I read somewhere, kind of pirate ethic. They will leave you behind, but they
Yeah.
tend to kind of. I think that there is a redemptive element in the eighth in those shows that lead up to the reveal, right? In the eighth episode, I thought the eighth episode was quite good. I enjoyed it. I mean, again, it had an interesting too. I mean, the Numenorians were not redeemed for me, but Elendil's talk with Muriel was quite good, I thought. You know, that whole idea that he talked about the faithful, and the faithful will commitment, and I think he was talking commitment to death. I mean, to accepting death as the gift of Eru Ilúvatar. I think that's what they were talking about. They were they you know, the whole idea of the faithful being committed to that, and that's, I think, essential. And I don't think that that had been brought out as well in the, you know, kind of body of the different episodes in the body of the work, because I think that's essential for Numenor. The struggle between, you know, the divide between the faithful and the Kingsmen, you know, as to you know, accepting death as a gift, and then the Kingsmen rejecting death as a punishment of Eru, seeing death as a punishment.
Hopefully that gets explored more. So that actually reminds me of one of my big objections with the show is manufactured drama, let's call it.
Yeah.
The queen is blind. Isildur is dead. We all know Isildur's not dead.
Yeah,
like you're just doing these things to make it more dramatic.
Yeah.
Or like it was like a murder mystery, but who is Sauron? Who's Sauron? If anything that the Lord of the Rings is not, one genre it does not really touch is the mystery, the detective fiction.
I think they were trying
to do that.
I think they were trying to, you know.
I thought that was kind of weak.
Yeah.
And I think it might have been much more powerful to know early on that Halbrand was Sauron, and to see that his manipulations of Galadriel, that doesn't require a reread or a rewatch.
Yeah, I thought you know, the whole his manipulation was quite good, but once you look at it from kind of the viewpoint of he's Sauron, I think that confrontation between Galadriel and Sauron and Halbrand Sauron was quite good, because he's saying, you know, he's saying things that make sense, and at the same time he's trying to manipulate her, even at the very end.
When he gets into her memories of her brother.
Yeah.
That I thought was done very well.
Yeah, and then also you know, the boat, the whole idea of the boat.
Yep, and then he kind of tries to drown her, but then he leaves. And then she knows it's Sauron, but she doesn't tell anybody. She's like, let's just keep making the rings.
Yeah. Well,
now
I think that's going to be her arc. At the end of it, she's going to end up at the Peter Jackson portrayal. She started off as kind of warrior queen. I don't want to, you know, death to all things. Yeah. I think the giving up of the knife was part of that redemption, the beginning, but she still got a ways to go, because she's, you know, hiding the fact that Sauron's around, and she knows who.
And, like she also tells Adar that she's on a genocide. She's on a mission to genocide all the orcs. She says that to him.
Yeah, she was genocidal, and you know, that kind of struck me as a kind of, because I've always seen Tolkien this way. Much of the first stage is Old Testament, kind of the great struggles, kind of God taking you know, almost a visible role in what happens, kind of the great, you know, the kingdom of David and Solomon collapsing, kind of, and the Lord of the Rings being much more New Testament, redemption, salvation through sacrifice. You still have a role of, you still have a presence of Eru, in what's going on, but it's an invisible one, fairly invisible one.
So yeah, I mentioned this to you probably years ago. That there's a way to read the Old Testament, the New Testament. Like was once described to me. It's called a typological reading, where everything in the New Testament echoes something that happened in the Old Testament.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Moses is Jesus, and Jesus is Moses is a pre-Jesus, whatever. And Tolkien is totally like that. And I think that these things that happened in the First Age are pre-echoes of the things that happened in Lord of the Rings. I think they tried to do a very similar thing with this show. Oh, we have the pre-Hobbits, we have the pre-Gandalf, we have. I think they tried to do that to some extent. I do think though there was a little bit of so when the first Star Wars reboot came out, The Force Awakens, it was made fun of by South Park, and South Park called them the member berries. Do you remember? We're just going to throw in these things to see if you remember it. And I totally think like that's what like the Balrog was.
Yeah,
just like a leaf flows all the way down. Oh, come on, really? You're just gonna.
I agree with you, but I think Van Gandalf is gonna face that Balrog at some point.
Oh, interesting.
Gandalf figure is going to face that Balrog.
Do you think that the Balrog will get loose, like in the last season, and destroy the Dwarf Kingdom?
Well, I think that would be the destruction of Casa Doom turning into Moria, right? So
yeah. But that doesn't happen until much later.
But he's Durin's bane, but maybe Gandalf doesn't defeat the Balrog.
Yeah.
Maybe the Gandalf.
Yeah, but it would just be like
yeah,
thousands of years too early for that to happen, or for like Durin's bane to be Durin's bane. Another thing, I am hoping we see one scene of a Tom Bombadil.
Maybe he will get Bombadil.
I think he actually fits this version of the Hobbits.
Yeah, well, maybe so. I mean, and who do you think Tom Bombadil is?
I'm assuming that Tom Bombadil is just another Maiar. I've always just assumed that.
Oh, well, I mean, I think he's Eru.
He came into the Earth.
I think he's Eru.
So I mean, that's one of the options. He's like he's either
that's one
Valar, a Maiar, or he's Eru.
Yeah.
He's also one of those. That's actually an interesting thing in the Lord of the Rings. The first half of the Fellowship of the Ring is the Hobbit growing up.
Yeah.
And then I think the first section of Book 2 of Lord of the Ring of the Fellowship is the Council of Elrond, and then it's officially the Lord of the Rings. There's no more goofiness. There's no more like Hobbit mischief. You know what I'm talking about?
Right. It goes from the Hobbit, which was essentially a children's story, to a serious kind of exploration of good and evil in a fantasy setting. Yeah, no, but I mean, I think it makes sense because I mean, Bombadil holds the ring, right? It has no effect on it.
Yeah. Yeah, so, nothing.
Nothing. And the honor is, why doesn't he just take it? Because he seems powerful enough to like withstand it. He shouldn't take it. But I mean, that would defeat the whole story of redemption, right? Because Frodo is kind of the Messiah. He's the suffering Messiah.
And
the way to Mount Doom.
And also, it's that
Go on.
Same argument. Why not throw it in the sea? Well, because you can never vanquish Sauron while it exists.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. He won't. Well, but Bombadil may be even able to destroy it. Who knows? I mean, Bombadil. I think, but if he's Eru, does he want to? No, I don't think so. I don't think Eru takes a direct role past the kind of the sinking of Numenor, right? Eru recedes into the background.
Yeah,
the actions are always hidden behind the actions of others. Because I mean, I do think that Goblin's biting of Frodo's finger off. That's Eru acting. acting on the free will of Gollum's free will, that is his desire for the ring, and Frodo's inability to take that last step, which is very Catholic. Right?
Yeah.
Catholic theology argues that you can only go so far as a human being. Right? Good acts will get you to a certain point, but then you need God's grace. And I think Tolkien was writing about that in Lord of the Rings. I think it's fairly clear to me. Same way that Ole's creation of the dwarves and his then kind of willingness to destroy his children in order to be redeemed by God is Abraham's sacrifice. I mean, that's clear to me. That he took that right out of Genesis. But so it's so I don't know. Tom Bombadil has always struck me as Eru, kind of just hanging out.
So I think a lot of this series, talking about Tom Bombadil and Sauron, I think a lot of it will be made better or worse by the rest of the series. So, for example, like, why is Sauron on the boat in the middle of nowhere, like halfway between the Undying Lands and Numenor, with other people? And
who are those?
So
now I'm
who are those other people?
I'm curious about that.
I actually heard this interesting read of that scene, because there's also when Halbrand like goes to get Galadriel, there's like a lightning strike that separates them. It's like a warning from Eru. So this is actually something I'm very interested in, the backstory between Sauron and Adar, because Adar said I cut Sauron, I killed Sauron.
Yeah.
So he's not dead. I mean,
no,
obviously. So why is Sauron on this raft? And an interpretation I heard, which I think is interesting, is like Sauron was giving like Eru one last chance to like, are you here or have you abandoned us? Like maybe. Maybe I'm ready to convert, but I need a sign.
Yeah, that's possible, because I mean, I think that Tolkien notes that that there is an attempt at some point by Sauron to kind of turn new leaf, transform himself into a force of good. So
he didn't want the judgment of the Valar. He refused to go back.
Yeah, he just is afraid.
Eowyn beckoned him. Yeah.
I think that's a good argument. I think that I don't think he's completely gone, but I think he ultimately sees power as an objective good. And that he can wield power to take free will away from elves and men and shape Middle Earth as he sees fit.
And so another thing he mentions, and I think this is either a lie on his part or this is the breaking of canon. He mentions to Galadriel, it's like, when I was under Melkor's or Morgoth's boot, I didn't have any sway, I didn't have any say, and I was kind of under his dominion.
I think that's a lie.
No, he's a free agent, and I hope they do this in the show.
Yeah.
Where before the sinking of Numenor, he makes the shrine to Morgoth, or
that's right.
The temple to Morgoth on Numenor, and
I think they have to do that.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful and haunting when he's like, "Oh no, they tell you about this Eru. That's a lie. Right. The real All Father is Morgoth. Or I think he just calls him Melkor.
Melkor. He calls him. He doesn't use Morgoth, the
true name.
He uses Melkor. But I agree, they have to do that. Without that would be a complete kind of violation of canon. He has to set up the cult of Melkor on Numenor, and it has to be very, very popular, with the exception of the faithful, right? Who are the Christians, right? Numenor is Rome, I think, and the faithful are the Christians. So I think Tolkien kind of took that element and kind of transformed it there. But he has to establish, and it's a kind of a cult that sacrifices human beings. So yeah, I think they have to do that. So I mean, what's your? I mean, just to kind of wrap it up, what do you think the second season and the rest will have to do to kind of catch fire?
So, if to answer that, let me what's my overall impression of this season? I do think, considering as like, well, there was $1 billion of money, and we know what a great fantasy series season one can do. Think of Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was a nail biter.
Yeah.
I think it was disappointing overall, considering the quality of the source material, the amount of money that went into it, the name brand recognition. I would say it's not, as of right now, season one is not a game changer for anything. Where Game of Thrones season one was a game changer.
Yeah.
Even like Westworld season one, Stranger Things season one, those are all game changers. This is not a game changer so far. Can it turn into that? Maybe. So what do they have to do? I think they need to drop the mystery thing.
Yeah, I agree.
And just give.
They should be done with that.
Quality narrative. I think that the show is a little split too much. They want to do the Hobbits, and they don't want to do the Dwarves, and then they want to do Gil-galad, and they want to do the Numenorians. I think the Hobbits should have come in like season 3 of 5. I don't think starting it. I think what they're really saying is like, hey, look, we have another Frodo. You like Hobbits, right? Come on, watch